Thanks for watching President Obama's 2015 State of the Union address. We now take you back to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for a special live broadcast from the White House, featuring a one-on-one conversation with Senior Advisor to the President Dan Pfeiffer, followed by a panel of senior administration officials answering your questions. Just use the hashtag #SoToChat to ask them. So right now, we go live to the White House.
Senior Advisor to the President. My name is Sam Stein. I'm the political editor at the Huffington Post, and as mentioned in that video, you can submit questions here for Dan, as taken by our colleague Arthur Delaney over there, at the hashtag #SoToChat. That's SOTU chat. So please send in your questions. We'll get to them at the end of this 30-minute interview. Our time is short, so Dan, first of all, I wanted to ask you, why the swipe at cable news shows in the President's State of the Union speech?
I didn't think it was a shot at the cable news shows, just the people on the cable news shows.
Fair
the
enough.
guests, not
Okay,
the hosts.
fair. All right, let's start with the message that the President was trying to send. It seemed pretty clear from the reactions we saw in the audience, but also on Twitter and elsewhere. Democrats loved the speech. Republicans, though, sat there and they said, well, didn't the President get the message that was delivered in 2014, and if not, why not? What was the State of the Union's message to the President's critics specifically?
Well, I think it was the speech is to the country, and he wanted to tell a story about where we've been, how we've come back over the last 6 years to the point where America is in the best place it's been in a long time, how middle-class economics got us there, and to lay out a vision based on middle-class economics about where we can go. And at the end, what he wanted to do was speak to the country and to the people in the room about the fact that if we work together, we can make real progress there. We're going to have real big disagreements, divided government. We can't expect them to rubber stamp our agenda. They can't expect us to sign theirs. But if we can find it in ourselves to put the politics of the moment beside and try to focus on people like Rebecca Earler, who the President talked about in the speech today, we can really take this country up to the next level.
Well, Republicans look at the speech and they say, after the day after the 2014 elections, the President comes out and says, I got the message. And then they look at this speech and they say, well, what is the message he actually got?
Well, I think I resist the notion that the Republicans won some sort of policy mandate in 2014. They ran excellent campaigns. They had a very fortunate map. They didn't run on defending the trust fund loophole or protecting the rights of large financial institutions not to pay large fees. And so we had a debate in 2012 on these issues about middle-class economics versus trickle-down economics. Middle-class economics won handily. The President's view is he's going to put forward his agenda. He's not going to be constrained in his vision by what a Republican Congress would necessarily pass. He's going to lay out what he's for. He encourages Republicans to lay out their agenda.
Yeah.
Something more than Keystone and repealing the ACA.
I'm assuming a lot of Democrats look at this speech and they see this policy portfolio and they wonder to themselves, well, geez, this is a great platform, maybe 4 or 5 months too late.
Look, I think we can do hindsight.
Let's do it.
I'm sure that'd be fascinating to everyone watching.
I'm sure, yeah.
I think you and I have already done that a couple times now. We can do hindsight on the 2014 campaigns. Sure. That was a tough race. Good candidates running in really tough places under tough conditions. Sort of a lot of the momentum of the economy that people feel in their pockets has happened in the last few months as gas prices have dropped significantly. But I think there is as we go back and we look at, not for the purposes of trying to figure out what we could have done differently, but to learn from what happened in that election, to project forward about how we not just win elections in the future as Democrats, but make the best case for our policy vision. I think one of the things that's clear is there are big challenges in this country, and we need a big vision to meet that.
Well, let's take it out of the politics context and then put it into the policy context. What in this set of proposals that you're introducing tonight do the people in the White House find to be the most interesting, the most exciting? What are the things that you are unveiling now that maybe you can say this will make the biggest difference in someone's life?
Well, I think if you were to bring the head of the Domestic Policy Council up here, the head of the Treasury Department, all of them,
they'd all have their own answer.
They'd all have their own answer because they have a specific suite of issues they're focused on. They're very interested in. I'll just give you a couple that I think I've seen be very resonant with people as we've unveiled them in the last couple of weeks. I think the community college would make a huge difference in people's lives, and it's not a theoretical exercise. You know that because you look at what is happening in Chicago, where Rob Emanuel, our former chief of staff and the mayor there, has put together a plan like ours, where Governor Haslam in Tennessee, a Republican, has done it. I think the child care tax credits, the president talked a lot about how the cost of child care was hugely problematic for a family like the Earlers, and if you can help, you can make a difference there, it'd be a huge thing.
And Arthur was wondering this himself, but like, was there a specific reason that you tripled the child care tax credit? Was that, were economists saying to you, you know, you need to go 3 times as big as what it's been?
I mean, I think it was a combination of real world experience of what the cost of childcare has been, and sort of thinking about, you know, if you look at people, because of the problem of wage stagnation, people always think, well, where people haven't gotten a raise. But that's actually an overly generous way of looking at it, because the cost of everything else, including primarily childcare, has gone up. People are actually getting a pay cut every year. And so if you can, so we're going to do what we can to raise wages. We're also going to do what we can to make paychecks go further, and that's what the child care provision is
Well, let's put that in the broad issue of middle-class economics, which is essentially the central part of the State of the Union address. Love the phone. It seemed like a good ringtone. So we're 6 years into the presidency now. We only have one more State of the Union after tonight. How much responsibility do you think the president and this administration deserve or shoulder for the fact that we're still talking about the need to help the middle class? I mean, we are 6 years in, right?
Well, I think, you know, we have done a lot to slow the trends down. Passing the Affordable Care Act is a huge piece of creating additional financial security and helping the middle class's wages go further. Preserving their tax cuts in 2012. I mean, lots of, you know, what we have, wages are starting to tick up, you know, in part because the labor market's tightening because of the job growth under this president. But there's more work to do. That's the point the president's making tonight. It was hard to tackle it fully in the midst of the crisis, but as the president said, we're turning the page on that, and we can do more.
So the response to the critics, like, for instance, Speaker Boehner's office, which says, here's the president talking about middle-class economics, and it's been 6 years. Your response to him is essentially, it could have been a lot worse if not for what
we've done a lot. We need to do more. It's certainly a lot better than if we had implemented the policies that the Speaker or Republican president would have put in place. It would have been devastating.
Because, you know, we have people like Mitt Romney out here trying to rip the issue from the president. He's going to be the poverty candidate. Is there a political vulnerability that you feel? There's no reaction from the audience, please.
No, we don't feel, this is not a political vulnerability. Okay. I think the challenge for Republicans, whether it's Mitt Romney or anyone else who wants to just take the same old set of trickle-down policies and put the word middle class in front of them, is going to fail. Okay. And we saw that with Romney's policies in 2012.
So the big disagreement, obviously, now, they might like the community college proposal, for instance. They might like some of the child care tax credit proposal, but as the president noted, the big disagreement comes when you say, how do you pay for it? I've been at these background briefings today, and your response is at various points in time, Republicans have suggested these pay-fors. Well, they're not in favor of them right now, as we can tell. So let's look forward. How do you sell Republicans, or how do you soften their opposition on some of these pay-fors? And what leverage points do you have?
Well, I think that there is a, you know, I don't think it's not inconsequential that they have supported some of these things in the past. It's not just they support some of the same proactive tax relief we support, but they also support some of the pay-fors. Most notably, I think, is the fee on
in smaller doses, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I think, but I think that there are, if they are willing to work with us, we can find some agreement. You know, and I think our leverage is the American people and what they care about, and we're going to make the case to them. And Republicans, if you can tell from the rhetoric you hear from Republicans on the stump, is they know they have a problem. An identity problem in the middle class, and if they want to do something about it, we'll be a willing partner.
A little bit of a wonky question here, but is there any reason why the administration
You might be asking the wrong guy.
Sorry. Any reason why you can just punt the question then. Any reason why the administration didn't use the same transaction fee as a pay-for that was in the House Democratic proposal? This is a transaction fee on basically the actions that banks take every day.
I'm going to give you a less than wonky answer,
Sure.
but you know, there have been, I haven't looked at in great detail at the House Democrats one. We have always supported a fee on financial institutions themselves, in part because it does more to reduce risk-taking in the sector, and we think that's a better, because there is a benefit in the sense that you are able to sort of rebalance the sheet so that they're like wealthy, large financial institutions are helping pay for things the middle class needs, but there's also economic logic in the fact that we want to discourage risk-taking.
Disincentivize, yeah. Okay, a few things that I noticed in terms of what I thought were maybe contradictions within the speech, and maybe you can address these one at a time. The idea of middle-class economics going first, it was in the same speech that the president made a very forceful push for trade authority, trade promotion authority, which was one of the few things that got a standing ovation on the Republican side of the aisle. Labor unions find this unacceptable. They call it undemocratic.
He wants to make sure, a lot of people on the Trans-Pacific Partnership are critiquing an agreement that has not yet been done. And so let's get the final agreement done, which we're still working hard on, and then judge the merits. If it is one the president believes does not help the middle class, it's not one that he will put forward.
But it's tough to judge the merits when a lot of this is being done in secrecy, right?
I think that that we are being more transparent to this than we get credit for, and we will endeavor to do more, to do even better than we have been.
Okay. The other thing that it sort of stuck out to me is on the foreign policy front, on Iran. He says, Congress, don't meddle in this very delicate negotiation process that I'm currently having right here. And then with respect to ISIS, however, and an authorization for use of military force, instead of him taking lead in introducing a AUMF, he's sort of saying, Congress, I need you to collaborate with me on an AUMF. Why is Congress not meddling in Iran fine, but Congress meddling?
Well,
you see where I'm going with
there's
this.
a very specific situation involving Iran, if you give me
Sure.
2 minutes here, is part of the agreement around, we have reached a temporary agreement with the Iranians, which they have stopped their progress and even been rolled back in some cases, giving us the world greater transparency into their nuclear activities. Part of that agreement is there will be no new sanctions. If Congress acts here, the Iranians will view this as new sanctions, and as importantly, our partners in the P5+1 will believe that, which will mean two things. It'll mean the negotiations will collapse, ending the diplomatic path of solution here, and it's been hard work to get the world to unite around our sanctions regime, because they would very much like to buy cheaper Iranian oil.
Sure.
And if we are seen as the ones who blow up the negotiation, the sanction regime around the world is likely to crumble, and it will have the opposite effect of what I think a lot of Democrats,
Everyone rushes
a lot
back
of
in.
Democrats and Republicans in Congress have called for.
Yeah. But why don't you address the AUMF portion of that, too? There seemed to be an understanding as late as last week that you all might actually introduce your own language, but that was not the impression I saw after the State of the Union.
I don't think
today.
the intention of the State of the Union was not to change that impression.
Okay.
I think whatever we put forward is going to be, as it's been in the past, involves a lot of coordination and consultation and work together with Congress. We have a very specific situation as it relates to Iran that would upset these negotiations and leave the last remaining, if you take the diplomatic path off the table, you're left with force.
Do you have a question from Twitter, Arthur?
Richard Engel, the top foreign correspondent for NBC News, had a highly retweeted post saying President Obama talking about stopping ISIS and successes in Iraq and Afghanistan, not what it looks like where I spend my days. And we had a related question on the SoTu chat hashtag from Colette, who may be in this room, I'm not sure. How stable / reliable are the U.S.-supported resistant groups against ISIL in Iraq and Syria? Some see similarities to Iraq in 2002.
I think I need to start following Richard Engel on Twitter because I wasn't aware of that. I think, look, I have tremendous respect for Richard Engel's reporting and his courage in covering conflicts for many years on the front lines. It's a very brave thing he does. Look, I think our assessment of where we are in Iraq and Syria is we have made progress. We have blunted ISIL's momentum. We have degraded a lot of their capabilities, particularly around command and control and their ability to amass and maneuver forces. In Iraq in particular, we've made good progress. We've taken back some areas, Mount Sinjar probably most famously. But there's a lot more work to do, both in terms of pushing back ISIL in degrading them in order to defeat them, and also in building up the modern elements in Syria to push back on them. We received authority last year to begin training the Syrian rebels. That's a project that's underway, but it's going to take a lot of work. And as the president said, the night he announced that we'd begin action in Iraq and Syria, that this is going to take a long time.
Yeah, you know, we were talking about this in preparation for this. I'm wondering if you could weigh into this. But, you know, how confident is the administration that they will leave the Middle East, as if you have control of leaving what's there, but that you will have a Middle East in a better place in 2016 than the one you inherited in 2008?
Look, I think our presidency has taken the time of a period of massive transition and tumult in the Middle East as a lot of the old orders have crumbled in places like Egypt and Libya. And so our job is to do the best we can to manage that transition, to help build up the right partners over there, and first and foremost protect American national security interests there. And so that is a tough project. It's one we are working on. It is more successful in some parts of the region than others, but we're going to keep going at it.
Okay. Let's switch a little bit to Keystone, not named by name in the speech, but referred to as a pipeline.
Yes, many reporters took the text Control F Keystone and then tweeted that we would not.
I mean, if you had the Control F pipeline, fair enough. We're not good at Control F two things. I read the way it was phrased, and just for those who didn't watch, or you should have watched, but it was phrased essentially that
If you didn't watch and you're watching this, you have some questions to ask about your life.
reassess your life priorities. But he said we should be thinking more about broader infrastructure and, you know, a comprehensive project that would create many more jobs. And I read that in some respects for almost as a signal of him being like, I'm fine with Keystone if it's part of a huge infrastructure deal. Is that a...
No, that was not the intention.
Okay, I misread.
Yes.
Okay.
I think the intention was to point out, I mean, the basic point on Keystone generally is there's a process in place.
Yeah.
It makes no sense for Congress to front-run that process for political reasons. The president has set out a test about the climate impacts of Keystone that he thinks goes into the national security assessment of whether Keystones are national security. That process is underway. It was slowed down for a long time because of this court decision in Nebraska. That case resolved itself in the last week or so, and so the process is underway again. Point he's making is, if you were to listen to the Republicans, you would think this was the Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge all rolled into one as the consequential American infrastructure project. And that is not the case. It will create some temporary jobs, which is not inconsequential, but not on the magnitude of which they've talked about.
Sure.
And a much smaller number of permanent jobs. And at a time in which oil prices are going down, the rationale for this is, the political rationale for this, for the Republican pipeline, is much more important than the substantive
The
rationale.
Republican pipeline. That's more than just a Republican pipeline.
The Republican rationale for the Keystone
Okay,
pipeline.
fine, fair enough. All right,
They may want to call it the Republican pipeline or the Keystone Party, one of the two.
I'm going to do just one or two more, and then we'll kick it over to Twitter. You know, you look back not too many years ago to old State of the Unions, and the grand bargain was the elusive goal back then. And, you know, once again, it wasn't part of this. At this juncture, what does something like that rank on the administration's priorities list?
I think the first most important priority is the middle class initiatives the president talked about.
Yeah.
That is the most urgent crisis, is wages in this country and helping the middle class. We are in a much better spot from, you know, when we were at this at the State of the Union a few years ago in terms of our fiscal situation. Deficit's been cut in 2/3 in part because of the Affordable Care Act. Healthcare costs are slowing dramatically, extending the life of the trust fund. So there's more work to do there, and if we can find an opportunity to do that in a way that doesn't hurt the middle class, we should do it. But if we're looking for a grand bargain, let's have a grand bargain on jobs and wages.
And my last question is, the line that everyone's going to remember tonight is him gloating about the 2 election wins he's had. Look at you smile. I guess you deserve it. You were part of those campaigns. That was off the cuff, I assume?
Yeah, that was not in the prepared text we released on Medium beforehand.
Okay, thank you. All right, Artie, why don't you take it away with some Twitter questions?
So here's one through the hashtag from Nicholas Chu. It says, other than the Keystone Pipeline, what types of infrastructure do you propose we should be prioritizing?
Well, I think because we have gone so long in this country without addressing our infrastructure, there is a huge backlog of roads, bridges. I think ports are a place that should be really near the top of the list because we have a lot of these super tankers being built because the Panama Canal has been widened, but they can't come here because
Yeah,
we're
there's only
not,
like a select number of ports that can
right, and not
accommodate
enough of them are here. And so if we could widen our ports, that's one example, but it is not, there is not a lack of good options if we get some real infrastructure money in this country.
Okay, here's one from Tim Brown. What major areas of tax system will be simplified to close loopholes? Is a complete tax rewrite likely, and what style, e.g. flat tax?
Flat tax is not in the plan the president put forward. But what we're talking about here is there is a series of loopholes. The president mentioned some like the trust fund loophole. We've talked about others on the corporate side in the past, private jets being a notable and fun one that's worth mentioning, that can be addressed. And I think if we can get together and find ways to cut those out and use some of the savings of that to invest in the middle class, that'd be the right thing to do. As for the political likelihood of that, the Republicans have said they're interested in it. We're interested in it if the middle class are the ones who benefit, not the wealthy and the corporations. Everything's hard in Washington these days, but the president was willing to give it a go if the Republicans are.
One thing that I wanted to talk about was immigration reform, which if you asked 2 years ago, that was the area of commonality. I mean, everyone assumed it was going to get done. And tonight we've gotten to the point where the main thrust of your immigration, the portion of the immigration speech was about veto threats. I mean, we've gone from a very weird, positive place to a very negative place. Are there areas of commonality that still exist, maybe not a comprehensive bill, but something on, for instance, work visas that you can see perhaps negotiating with Republicans and saying, okay, we know we disagree on the big stuff, but let's at least get this stuff done?
Theoretically, yes. And I think it's important to note that one of the reasons why it was not dealt with as extensively in this speech is in part because we gave a primetime address on immigration back in November. I think theoretically there should be common ground. I think would be a lot of support for something like the Senate bill, whether that would be a majority in this House, this new House majority. I'm not sure about that. What I think is, but when you think about where the Republicans are right now, we're the point where the Republican House has not taken any votes, to my knowledge, that actually help improve the system. Their most recent vote was not just to undo the
It
president.
depends how you define improving the system. They would say building up border security is the prerequisite first step.
Maybe they passed a border bill at some point. I'm not sure that even happened.
Okay.
I mean, the House literally blew up over like the smallest portion of the DREAM Act last year. But let's delve a second on their vote from last week, which is not just let's undo President Obama's executive action that hasn't started yet, that without a dramatic consequence of all people's country, but to take the Dreamers who were offered deferred action almost 3 years ago from this president, many of whom came to this country when they were very young, through no fault, all of them came to this country young, through no fault of their own, under the House Republicans would then take those people, take away their deferred action, and then deport them back to countries most of them don't remember. That is the overwhelming position of Republicans, not just in the House and the heart of the party. And so if the House is going to take positions like that, absent a huge change from that, it's going to be really hard to get something real done.
Okay. For the record, they wouldn't physically deport them. They would just say you can't renew your DACA.
And put you back on the.
Yes, but the system is already so broken as it is that they would argue it
Well,
wouldn't matter.
I mean, if you were around before deferred action, there were a lot of people who felt the system was not so
Sure.
broken that they weren't on the deportation list.
You got another Twitter question, Arthur?
We have plenty.
Yes, send in some more questions to SoTu chat as a reminder.
One from Tyler Lepard. Why didn't Obama address Ferguson and police brutality more directly?
Well, I think he made a reference to it in what I think is a very important way, which is about the divisions in our country. We have a commission that is working, and when that report is done, I think you can expect to hear the president to address it in a very thorough way.
Are we talking about like a primetime speech that announces these findings? Is that
I don't know whether it'd be in a primetime speech, but I think it'd be in a very high-profile way. He's very interested in this, and he wants to do it in a way where he can delve into it in substance and talk about it seriously, which would be hard to do in the course of the State of the Union in the detail in which he thinks it deserves and before the commission report is done.
What else do we have over there, Artie?
On the trade deal, this is another question from Colette. that I noticed.
Whoever Colette is, congratulations.
Colette was
Colette's
on
in
the
the front
hashtag.
row.
Oh, there's Colette.
We could get Colette a chair if need be.
Colette got on the hashtag before it was deluged. Anyway, how will POTUS work on convincing other Dems on the fence about TPP, the trade deal, to support this legislation?
Well, I think he will make the case as to why he thinks the deal is good for American workers, why what it does is it makes the rest of the world play by a set of rules we're already playing by. And like I said, we need on TPP, we need to have a final deal so that we can show exactly how that manifests itself. He'll do that, but like he understands that people have differences on this. They are sincere differences. They're passionately held differences, and in some cases we're going to have to agree to disagree. But he will certainly make the case where he can.
I want to ask you a question about the actual process of the State of the Union. This was billed as sort of a new way to approach these speeches. You released the text early. For instance, you put out a lot of the big proposals early. You used different technologies and mediums to announce this. Why did you change it up so much? Do you think that the old way of doing the State of the Union was sort of obsolete and past its time and not giving you the bang for the buck? Explain the thinking, now that we're past the State of the Union, about why you had alterations in strategy.
I do think the old way of doing it was obsolete. I think one of the things that we take some pleasure in is like trying to find some old conventions about the way things are done and doing them differently. And there's a lot about the State of the Union process and press coverage around it and how the White House rolls it out that is like a cut and paste of the plan that could have been used three presidents ago. And we have a media that very different than we had 3 presidents ago. So we wanted to try some new things. And part of this is lessons learned from having done this so many times now. And so, one of the things that is like the tradition of the State of the Union is you go out, you give your speech, and then you barnstorm the country for, what used to be for Clinton, a couple of weeks, and you would talk about every proposal every day. What we've learned is every year the press attention, and not just like what the New York Times or the Huffington Post will write, but just sort of the conversation in the country, via social media, whatever else, would get shorter after the State of the Union. Mm-hmm. And so it's like we would get 3 days in a couple of years ago, and then last year, like by the second day, people were like, why are you in Wisconsin or wherever we were? Like, what are you talking about? And so what we try to do is do something different, is try to roll in instead of roll out of the State of the Union. And I think we feel it's worked very well. There are some, like releasing the text in advance is something that has been a particularly pet peeve of mine.
I was going to say, it was either on Medium or some outlet was going to break the embargo.
Well, there's this I've worked in politics for 15 some years now, and there's like this tradition which is, and this goes even back to faxes. Like when I started, the White House would fax out the embargo text reporters, and then reporters, in order to either curry favor with sources or try to get early quotes so they can write their stories and go home, would then fax it to you on the Hill, and then you'd have it, and then you'd copy and distribute in your office, or in the age, once we finally got to email, would forward it to everyone. And then it's this point where everyone in Washington had this embargoed text, but no one in the country did. And so it just seemed ridiculous. And then we got to the point the last couple of years where someone would just decide to break it because why not? And so if everyone in Washington gets to read along as the president speaks, let's let everyone do it.
We've taken too long on process stuff. Is there anything else on the Twitters?
There are a few different questions about student debt. One from Eric Lecomte. It's great to hear POTUS community college plan. He also raised student debt. What are his plans for easing student debt?
Well, we have one very specific executive action that we took last year. We took a few years ago, and then we expanded significantly last year, allowing people income-based repayment, so that people would only pay a certain percentage. Their payments will only be a certain percentage of their income. We need to do more to promote that so more people know they can take advantage of it, but that's a huge piece. And we have been supportive of proposals in Congress from Elizabeth Warren and others about refinancing. And so we're going to keep looking for ways to do that, because this is a huge growing problem that gets worse every day as more and more people. So there's that, and then if you don't have debt yet, we also have to, if you're getting into college, find ways to make college more affordable. We have a rating scorecard, so a lot of people can price out for value coming out later this year.
Well, the Republican response on the college stuff, the community college stuff, is it's just an unfunded free tuition, and that it's great in theory, but how the hell are you going to pay for it? So,
Well, as we have common sense pay for us. If Republicans have other ways they want to pay for it, they should put those forward and we can debate that. The context of the debate can't be, here's our plan and here's how we pay for it. And theirs is, we like your plan, we don't like how you pay for it, and now we're going to end the conversation. If they like it, come up with a pay for it.
Okay.
And it's not a mandate, it's not free community college for everyone. You have to graduate on time, get good grades. So you have to be responsible in the way you do it, and it's worked in Tennessee and a Republican state.
we're almost out of time here. I think we might have time for one more Twitter question, and then we can end it there.
This is from Laura Wagner. Why did Obama not mention gun control? Is it still on his agenda?
It is. I mean, he mentioned Newtown and Tucson as two examples. There's probably no issue that's been more infuriating in its ability for the public will to get through this Congress. So if he sees another opportunity to do it, he will take every step he can. And this is certainly not a substitute for what legislative action would do, but we had about 24 executive actions that the vice president came up with in the post-Newtown task force, and we're continuing to try to implement those every day.
Okay. Dan, I know you were asked about this on Meet the Press, and you declined to give any concrete answer, but now that you're here in the White House, is this your last State of the Union?
I'm going to decline to give a concrete answer here, too.
Wow, letting down legions of followers.
Maybe
Unbelievable.
I'm going to wait till the HuffPo
Exclusive
folks
with
leave,
us?
and I'm just going to do it directly with these people in the room.
Fine, fair enough.
It's a hashtag #SoToChat exclusive.
All right, Dan, thank you so much for doing this.
All right, thank you, Sam.